Hi, this is Doug from 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, and welcome to my first episode of the GEOS Adventures. Now, I've been planning on doing a GEOS mini-series for quite a while now, several months, and I was going to have it just be part of my regular ChickenHead Chronicles 8-bit series, but I thought, GEOS deserves its own top billing, so that's what I'm doing. Today's going to be an introduction to the GEOS operating system. I want to talk about how to install it, the optimal kind of machine to install it on. I'm going to be working with real hardware here. And in future episodes, I'm going to dig deeper into GEOS, more about the operating system, more about the programs that were available for it, topics like printing, disk management, and I also want to spend some time in the future delving into the Commodore 128 version of GEOS, which is really, really good in a lot of ways. I want this series to dynamically grow based on your feedback and your input, so please leave a comment below. Tell me about your GEOS experiences. Reach out to me on Twitter or here in the comments. Let me know what kind of things you want me to cover so this channel can grow dynamically with the content that you want it to. First, just a bit of history. Traditionally, the Commodore 64 was a text-based operating system. We did everything in BASIC or eventually machine code on the familiar light blue Commodore 64 screen. But in 1984, with the advent of the Macintosh, and then on to 85, when the Atari ST and some computer called the Omega or Amigo or something like that came out, everyone started using graphic user interfaces, GUIs. Even Microsoft jumped on board in about 1985 with Windows 1.0, which really stunk. Where did that leave our precious little 8-bit machines with 64 kilobytes of memory that we were still happily banging away on? Were we relegated till the end of time just to type in load asterisk comma 8 comma 1 to do everything in the world? Well, in 1986, a company called Berkeley Softworks came to our rescue and came out with a new operating system for the Commodore 64 called GEOS, and that stands for Graphic Environment Operating System. And it was a real GUI that ran on real Commodore 64s with at least one 1541 disk drive. Now we could see representations of our disks right on the Commodore 64 desktop. New software was released like GeoWrite, GeoCalc, GeoPublish that was actual competitors to some of the higher-end 16-bit software that had been coming out. Now, Commodore jumped on the bandwagon here and started bundling GEOS with their 64C computers, which was a brilliant idea, and they ended up selling millions of copies of it because they sold millions of Commodore 64s. In 1987, Berkeley Softworks shipped a version for the Commodore 128 that took advantage of the Commodore 128's expanded memory, faster drives, faster CPU, and the 80-column mode, and it made for a really, really cool version, which I will cover in the future. Now, I'm sure there's still hundreds of thousands of copies of GEOS in somebody's closet or in their basement or their attic. But what if we want to use GEOS on our current machines that we love so much? Well, the good news is that the current license holders of the GEOS operating system have basically released it free for download from their website. Let's head over to the website right now and take a closer look at it. Now, if you're a classic collector like me, you may have a couple of 1541 drives, maybe a 1571 drive, or if you're really lucky, even like a 1581 drive, like this little beauty that I have right here, which is the 880K 3.5-inch drive that works on all Commodore's 8-bit computers. Now, to be honest, with GEOS, 2 drives is recommended. They can be two 1541s or any combination. What's really perfect is if you use an SD to IEC device, like this little guy right here. This I get from The Future Was 8-Bit, which is your ideal source for Commodore 64 and 8-bit accessories, games. What do we got here? We got Miss Rodman, we got the Epix Fast Loader. All of these are available right from Future Was 8-Bit. To be honest, I really, really wanted GEOS to run properly from my Pi 1541 drive. It's a reasonably good drive, and it can emulate both a 1541 and a 1581 drive. So I thought this would be the perfect little device for GEOS. But like so many other things with the Pi 1541, it just doesn't work. You can boot up GEOS with it just fine, but the minute you try to change the disk to anything else, no matter how you do it, it crashes GEOS, locks it up, has no idea what to look for. If you've had better luck with a Pi 1541 running GEOS, please let me know in the comments. Let me know what utilities you found. The SD to IEC, on the other hand, works really well because there is a special utility called UIEC from LyonLabs, and I'll show you that in just a bit. If you want to use GEOS on an original system with a real disk drive, a Vice Session, or a C64 Mini or Maxi, you can download the appropriate files from this website, cbmfiles.com/geos/geos-4.php, and there's a picture of the website right there. Now notice there are versions there for the D64, D71, and .d81 files. Since we're working with the Commodore 64 version today, download the appropriate file and save it to your PC or Mac. If you plan on using the SD to IEC, as I very highly recommend, download this special .d81 version that contains an extra bit of software to control your SD to IEC. It also has the benefit, this version has the benefit of containing GeoWrite and GeoPublish and GeoPaint right on the .d81 file. So this is actually a really good one to use from LyonLabs.org. Here's their website right here, and I'll scroll down to the file. So as you can see on the website right there, there's a link for the UIEC.d81 file. Use that one if you have an SD to IEC, and you will be a happy camper. Just to let you know, the resources at LyonLabs.com have been invaluable. There are so many links to cool utilities and cool software for GEOS, links to slideshows that he's created over the years for different shows that he's been to talking about GEOS. It's really a great resource, and I recommend looking into it. It's got some documentation on there that you can't find very easily on the web too. Now, while we're on the PC, let's grab one more piece of important software. This is DraCopy, DRACopy 1.0e, and we're going to use it to take our .d81 images or .d64 images, and I'll show you how to convert them over to a real floppy disk if that's how you want to do it. Now, there's a version of DraCopy called 1.0d, which is better in some ways because it has a split screen mode, so you can see two devices at a time. It's really nice. But it doesn't work quite as well with the SD to IEC and the Pi 1541, and it has a harder time making like .d81 disks. So use 1.0e for these particular procedures, and there's the link, the website, and the link to it. So take these GEOS files, whether it's the UIEC or the regular ones, make sure they're unzipped, put them on your SD to IEC device in a folder where you'll know where to find them. Make sure you unzip them first because it's not going to work when they're still compressed. Now that we have GEOS on our SD to IEC from thefuturewas8bit.com, let's take a look at my hardware that I'm going to be running GEOS on. Now this little beauty here is my Commodore 64C I picked up last year at AmiWest. She runs beautifully, and I really actually like the stylings of the 64C over the bread bin. I know I'm going to get some comments on that. Now, while GEOS will run pretty well with just 64K and is totally usable, you will be much happier if you have expanded memory. Now this one is a 256K REU. This is the 1764 RAM expansion designed for the Commodore 64. Mine works with my Commodore 128 without any issues. Other people have different problems with it. It adds 256K to our 8-bit machines, but It does it by having some chips inside to handle copying data in and out of main memory fairly quickly. Now, this does not show up as basic memory. There are ways to access it with your programs. GEOS, on the other hand, works directly with the RAM and makes it an integral part of the system. There are vendors who sell GEOS RAM cards on eBay, and Commodore Forever has some too. They work fantastic. And the Commodore Forever should theoretically work with this too. Second, I want to point out this little video breakout box. I got this from my pal John at CommodoreForever.net. He makes them for the C64, the 128, and I believe he's starting to make some for the VIC-22. It plugs into the standard AV port, and it gives you left and right audio out, just in case you're a lucky one who has stereo SIDs. This also will combine both channels. This also will combine the mono C64 output into both channels. It has composite output. You can just plug a composite cable right in, and it has S-video output for using on slightly more modern monitors and TVs. This thing works absolutely beautifully and gives me a beautiful image and really helps with the image or the video capture. The third thing is a mouse. GEOS really wants a 1531 mouse, but they're getting a little bit hard to find nowadays. Now, you can use GEOS with a keyboard and it works okay. You can use it with a joystick, it works fine, but a mouse is really the way you want to do it. Now, to overcome this, you can pick up this Micromys adapter, which plugs into the 9-port DIN and then has a PS2 port on the other side. Inside there's a couple jumpers. You can set it for 1530 mode, 1531, Amiga mode, or Atari ST mode. These are available for about $30 on Amigakit's website, and I'll put a link down here so you can pick one up yourself. Just use a regular old PS2 mouse. It works perfect with these. Next, I'm using an actual 1581 floppy drive as my main drive. Now, GEOS is a large program, and it takes up most of the 170 kilobytes of a 1541 floppy, meaning that all programs have to reside on other floppies. By using a 1581 as the boot drive, I can have things like GeoWrite, GeoCalc, GeoPublish right on the same boot floppy, and it dramatically reduces disk swapping. If you want to boot from an SD to IEC or a Pi 1541, that works perfectly too, because both of them do a decent job emulating a 1581 drive. Now, for those of you who want to boot from a real floppy like mine, let's go over how we do that. Let's get her hooked up. Now, for those of us that want to use a real drive as a boot drive, let's go over how we can do that. If you're lucky enough to have a Zoom floppy on your PC, you can of course make real disks right on your PC. But if not, we can make real disks all day long just using an SD to IEC and a real floppy. Note you can use a Pi 1541 for this too, but with severe limitations related to disk swapping and changing. If you have an Ultimate 1541 or something similar, the procedure should be similar. So, set up your real device here, like my 1581 is device 8, and your SD to IEC is device 9. And I'll post a link down at the bottom here. So if you don't remember how to switch your SD IEC to device 9, I'll send a link so you can do it. Now let's boot up File Browser. And from File Browser, just browse to where you put the new Draw Copy program. That's mine. Okay, so let's hit the F3 key to change devices. We're going to change to our SD to IEC. You can see in the upper right hand corner it changes to it. Now using the cursor keys, go down to where you put your GEOS files. I'm going up and down here, and then when we get to the folder we want, use the right cursor key to go into the folder, and we're going to choose here our GEOS-UIEC.D81. We're going to go right into there and select it. There we are. And now we can see the contents of that disk. Now, how do we copy this to a real floppy? First of all, make sure you have a blank formatted floppy, 1541 or a 3.5-inch 1581, whichever one you're doing. We hit the O key for other options. we hit the K key for disk copy, and it's going to say at the bottom, select destination drive. Again, with the F3 key, we switch our devices. There it's chosen the 1581 drive, and we'd hit return, copy disk from 9 to 8. Yes, device 9 to device 8. If I were to hit yes right now, it would copy that entire .d81 file over to a 3.5 inch. Now, a .d64 takes about 15 or 20 minutes. A .d81 can take 30 minutes or more to write, so I'm not going to do it right now. I've already got it done. Now, you can use this procedure to create floppy disks from all of your .d64 or .d81 files. So if we change our device, we're going to go back a level. You can choose any of these. There's GeoCalc on D64, GeoPub, GeoSpell. Any of these you can put onto actual floppy drives with that same procedure. Works out really nice. Now, let's boot into GEOS. Now in this instance, I'm using my Real 1581 as my boot drive, so it's device 8. If you're using your SD to IEC, make sure that's set to device 8. Use File Browser to browse to your .d81 file for GEOS. Select that as the main one. Quit out of it. You're ready to go. Now let's use our traditional load *8, 1 that we've all been doing for almost 40 years. And in a moment, we'll be ready to start GEOS. Now, GEOS takes over your disk drive with a utility called TurboDisk that can theoretically speed up even a 1541 drive by a factor of 5 to 7. It works pretty well. Now, I've also booted GEOS with my Epix fast loader from The Future Was 8-Bit. I didn't really see any performance improvement in booting up, not too much, but then I lost my memory expansion because there's only one cartridge slot. I was able to use GEOS 64 on my new Commodore 128D, which I'll show you another time, with Jiffy DOS enabled, and that seemed to speed things up a little bit. Now, on to the GEOS desktop. Let's take a closer look. Okay, so right now, you see we're on the GEOS desktop, and you'll easily recognize things. Now on the right here, we have a list of our drives, and listed right here. Here's the A drive, which is drive 8, the B drive, which is drive 9, and then we have another drive down here, which I'll explain in a second, effectively drive C. Now, here, this window right here shows the contents of the drive that's currently active, which is the GEOS drive here. You can click the little piece of paper to flip between windows which show the contents of your drive, and you can click down here to go backwards. Up here we've got a series of menus that allow us to do various things. You see they're just nice little drop down menus just like any GUI would have. And the amazing thing is this is running on a 1 megahertz 6502 8-bit CPU. Absolutely amazing. Now some of the speed up on this is due to the fact that I have an REU memory expander, but it is quite usable without it. Now let's walk through the basics of GEOS. The first thing we want to do is locate our config program, our configure program. This tells GEOS what's inside of it and what hardware it has to work with. It does a great job of auto-detecting the devices you have connected, and actually it works a heck of a lot better than PCs of the same era did at detecting what's inside of them. Now notice it sees my RAM expansion automatically, and it's automatically checked RAM reboot and DMA for move data. This is good as it allows for fast rebooting of the machine back into GEOS mode. Now let's look at drive C here. This, we can either tell it no drive, or we could add one of our existing drives if we have a something on device 10, a 1541 or a 1571, it would show up here. In this case, I've got RAM 1541 chosen. So it's going to use a 170 kilobyte portion of the RAM expansion as an actual RAM drive that we can swap information to. Now, drive B here, this is going to be the SD to IEC. Now, I can tell it to emulate whatever kind of drive I want to. So you're going to see here, I can have my SD to IEC emulate a 1541, a 1571, or a 1581, all depending on the type of file I want the SD to IEC to use. In this case, I want to tell it to use a .d64 file, so I'm going to say, okay, drive B is a 1541. If instead I wanted to use this as a 1581 drive, I'd select no drive here again. It would bring up my list of drives to choose, and I'd choose a 1581, and then I could use .d81 files with it. Click File, Save Configuration, and then File and Quit again. So let's look at these new drives that we have right here. You see we've got RAM 1541 on the right-hand side. We've got our GEOS drive up here. This is just my 1581. Now, some of these files you're going to be able to run and execute. Some of the files are just placeholders for different things. For example, you're not going to be able to launch a program like MPS 803. You try to launch something like that, it gives you an error message. But other programs you're going to be able to launch just fine. You launch a program by double-clicking it, just like you would with any GUI. So let's launch the word processor, GeoWrite. This won't be a tutorial on GeoWrite. That'll come in another episode. Let's take a look at our options. When GeoWrite comes up, it gives us the option to create a new document, which we can do, or open an existing document. So let's say we're going to create a new one. You can tell it which drive to save it on with this button here. But if you don't tell it which drive to save it on, it tells you right here, it's going to save it on the GEOS drive. We're going to call this Happy Test. And you see that GEOS handles upper and lowercase letters just fine. It assumes you're always typing in lowercase and unless you hit the Shift key. Hit the Enter, and it's going to create the file on the drive. Now, we have a very standard looking word processor here with lots of features you'd expect from a GUI-based program. Changing fonts, changing justification, left and right justification, changing line spacing, all of it available from these pull-down menus. Really quite powerful. So here we got hello 10 mark fans. And we can go ahead and change that font to something else just like this. Reads the font off the disk, boom, changes it. Let's open an existing file. We're going to close this one. And we're going to open up a list of all my fantastic patrons on Patreons. Now, did you know you can help support this channel on Patreon? Just follow the link that I'm going to print at the bottom of this page, and for as little as $2 a month, you can help support the channel and end up on this glorious list, which changes every week. And for $5 a month, you can earn some incredible swag, like full-color posters made by the incredible Pixel Vixen, JoJo073, and other people from the Amiga Art Contest 2019. Now, look how it handles multiple fonts on the same page. Hey, there's Alex Cheney, Arcadius Kwasny, Cameron Armstrong, Commodore Kid. All of these in completely different fonts. There's Pete Morgan, Pierre Cressman, Raging Orlando, Retro Recollections. Not bad for an 1 megahertz 8-bit computer, if you ask me. When you're done with the program, just choose Quit from the File menu. It saves whatever changes you've made, and it'll take you right back to the desktop. Now, you saw how fast that launched from a 1581 drive, and it really wasn't too bad. GeoWrite launched pretty quick, but what can we do to make it launch even faster? Let's look at putting it in our RAM drive. We've got it here, we may as well use it. Now you notice drive A, drive B, 1541 RAM drive has no letter next to it. We want to make this a usable drive, but GEOS can only use 2 drives at a time. So we click it, we drag it up to drive B. Now the 1541 RAM drive is going to become the active drive B, and we can put things in it just like you could do it with an actual GUI. So let's say we want to take GeoWrite and put it in the 1541 drive. We're going to take GeoWrite, we're going to drag by clicking to select it. I clicked it once to select it, and then I click it again, and now see how it's attached to the mouse, and I can move it and click a third time to drag it onto the RAM drive. It's now copying it from the 1581 into RAM. Now let's do the same thing with a data file. We're going to put Patreon over there into the RAM drive. Now when I click on the RAM drive, I'm just left clicking, you see it has GeoWrite and it has my file in it. I've got 129 kilobytes free. I could put a lot more in here. Now let's launch GeoWrite and watch how fast this launches from RAM. About 8 kajillion times faster, obviously. Now we're going to open a file. There's Patreon. Now, it's lost some of the special fonts because I don't have the special fonts copied over to my RAM drive, and it's unfortunately not smart enough to look at the main drive. But if you want to do this, you'd have to copy fonts over too. But you can see how fast it responds now by launching everything from the RAM drive instead of your floppy drive. Now, you can use this, your RAM drive, if you're going to be doing a lot of work on something and you want instant access to it, do all the work in the RAM drive, just save it to your actual floppy drive when you're done. Now, the cool thing is the RAM drive survives even if we switch our drives back to the B drive. Now, let's see if the contents of our RAM disk are going to be saved if we exit out to BASIC. We're going to click Options, we're going to click BASIC, and lo and behold, a few seconds later, we're at our standard BASIC screen where we can type a nice little program, print, quote, Mark. Go to 10, run. And we've got our nice little 10 mark here. Now we're done with our basic program. We want to go back to GEOS. As long as we have an REU, run, stop, restore will almost instantly bring us back to our GEOS screen. Now, you don't want to do something like use that to play a video game and then try and get back to GEOS. Just boot to a regular floppy drive in that case and run your game that way. But if you want to do some basic programming, it works great. Now, look, we've got our GEOS right and our Patreon file still right here in the RAM drive. Survived even though we went out to basic. Pretty cool. Now, if for some reason run, stop, restore does not work to get you back to basic, you can type SYS 49152 and that should zap you right back to GEOS. Now let's take a look at the SD to IEC utility. We're going to switch our RAM drive back to drive C. The contents are still fine. We're going to bring our SDIC back to drive B, and we're going to launch this utility that's called UIEC switch. Give that a little double click, and it's going to launch a new program that actually lets you browse your SD to IEC card. See, this is actually the contents of my SD to IEC card right here. I can choose any of these disk files, .d64, .d81, as long as I set it to use that, and use these as disks. We're going to choose, let's choose apps64.d64, click open. Now we're going to click File and Quit, and as soon as we get back, it's going to show that .d64 file, which we can then copy things to, move things around. Now let's do something practical with this. My GEOS UIEC .d81 file was missing some things. It did not have the calculator on it. It did not have the notepad on it. So let's copy those over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull those up from another file on my SD to IEC. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my config program. There we are, configure, and I'm going to tell it that I want to use a .d81 file in here. Tell it no drive, okay. Now we have an option to choose a .d81, there we go. We're going to save, and we're going to quit. We're going to launch our UIEC switch program again. This time I'm going to choose a .d81 file. Parent. We're going to go back a level, and then let's just choose GEOS64.d81. This has the files on it I know I want. Open that up, sees the data, quit, and now my .d64 file I just had on here is magically a .d81. It thinks that there's another 1581 on here. So I can go to my second drive. I can pick the files I know are missing, which happen to be, then I'm going to put calculator over there. And now that I've done this, now I'm going to be able to go onto my GEOS UIEC and find those missing files and be able to use them all I want to on here. Let's see, maybe they'll be at the very end. Yep, there's calculator. And now we have our little calculator here. Well, I think your brains are full now. So what we learned today, we learned how to get a copy of GEOS, either from the original or the copyright holder, or from LyonLabs.com, which has an even better version, wink wink. We learned how to set it up to boot from either a real drive or an SD to IEC. We learned how to play around with a RAM drive if you've got RAM expansion, which I recommend you get. And we learned how to move things back and forth between disks. GEOS, in my opinion, is absolutely, totally worth getting and worth experimenting with. It has by far the best word processor I've ever used on a Commodore 64. It has by far the best spreadsheet on a Commodore 64. And it's just fun to use. There's all kinds of fun things you can do with it. Now, in the next episode, we're going to dig deeper into the GEOS OS itself. We're going to learn a bunch of keyboard shortcuts and learn really how to get the most out of the system. And after that, we're going to cover the programs one at a time. We'll go all the way through GeoWrite, GeoPublish, GeoCalc, learn everything we can learn about these programs. And then we're going to learn about importing and exporting files from other programs. We're going to get into printing. I'm going to hook up my 803 printer to this and print some cool stuff out. And we're going to spend time on GEOS for the Commodore 128 in the future too. But remember, please let me know in the comments what kind of things you want me to teach about GEOS, and I'll concentrate on that. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at 10mark1. Like and subscribe to the channel and tell your friends about it, and share me on social media, please. Don't forget to tell me about all of your GEOS adventures in the comments below. But until next time, this is Doug from 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out.